I hope you enjoy this hero's journey into the realm of philosophy, psychology, and physics. If you want to help me create more content like this, please subscribe and consider sponsoring me here on YouTube. I also want to thank the Platonic Mystery School of the Divine Infinite Being for sponsoring this course, and you can check that school out at divineinfinitebeing.com. Synchronicity signposts toward individuation. In On Synchronicity, which Jung published in 1951, he said synchronicities have to do with spontaneous, meaningful coincidences of so high a degree of improbability as to appear flatly unbelievable. Most of us have experienced meaningful coincidences. You're thinking of something and then something else in the material world happens that seems to be symbolically related to what you were thinking or what your particular moral conundrum might be at any given moment. So I am saying in this class you can use synchronicities to help guide you towards individuation or becoming a complete person by realizing you are one with the archetype of wholeness through the union of opposites, which is the God archetype, and then you can reconcile all of the opposing impulses that you have to deal with in your life. So I say ask God to tell you how to serve Him. Keep your eyes and ears open for meaningful coincidences. God is the universe and everything in it. One way He communicates is through symbolically meaningful coincidences between material events unfolding in space-time. Although each instance of synchronicity has a unique meaning, all synchronicities point to the ultimate archetype of wholeness through the union of opposites, God, because they all indicate a union of the overarching opposition between mind and matter. So the archetype of wholeness through the union of opposites. Well, you can categorize all of existence into two main categories, mind and matter. There are many mental polarities like happy and sad, and there's many material polarities like heavy and light. Well, all of the various pairs of opposites are therefore contained in the overarching opposition between mind and matter. Synchronicities, all of them, point to a union of mind and matter, because material events seem to be symbolically related to the mind. This quote here, "Take what you have gathered from coincidence," comes from Bob Dylan's song, "It's All Over Now, Baby Blue." So that picture there is of Krishna, the bluish-black god, and there's his famous form as a baby. And I'm saying synchronicities are God luring you towards Him. Synchronicity. Here is your scarab. Jung explains that one of his patients had an overly dualistic, rationalistic, Cartesian attitude and was therefore incapable of perceiving the influence of the collective unconscious mind. One night she dreamed that someone gave her a golden scarab beetle, a costly piece of jewelry. As she was telling Jung her dream the next day, a very similar-looking beetle, which was not usually seen in that part of Switzerland, began persistently buzzing against the window. Jung opened the window, let the beetle fly in, caught it in his hands, then handed it to the patient, saying, "Here is your scarab." So that cured her of the block that she had about believing in the existence of archetypes in the collective unconscious mind, this Cartesian attitude. René Descartes said there's two types of existence: unextended thinking substance and unthinking substance extended in space. This is the Cartesian split. The material world has no soul. It's just unthinking atoms randomly bumping together in space. Well, Descartes wouldn't say it's random. He did believe in God, but he said the material world, including all of the animals and plants, they have no soul. They're just dead matter, organized like a machine wound up by God. So if there's no soul in the material universe, you wouldn't expect to find any meaningful communications therein. But when this patient was talking about her dream of a golden scarab beetle, and then this beetle was buzzing against the window, and Jung points out usually insects try to go to the light away from a dark place, but in this instance the beetle was trying to get in from the bright light day into the darker room. So Jung did believe in synchronicities. He believed this was a synchronicity, and he handed the beetle to the woman, and then she realized, oh, that's strange. This extremely symbolically meaningful coincidence has occurred. Maybe there is this overarching archetype of the self luring me towards it, and that synchronicity opened up our mind to the possibility of a collective unconscious mind. So for this class, Immortality and the Unreality of Death, A Hero's Journey Through Philosophy, Psychology, and Physics, the existence of synchronicities should help us take this leap of faith in the idea that there is this overarching God who is immanent in every point of the cosmos, and that furthermore this God cares for us and can communicate with us directly, and one of the most common ways God does that, in my opinion, is through synchronicities. Synchronicity. All synchronicities point to the self, so I'm reiterating this important point. In synchronicity, so first Jung published an article on synchronicity, and then later he expanded it in his Synchronicity. So in Synchronicity, Jung explains that the beetle symbolizes the archetype of rebirth. The ancient Egyptian Book of What Is in the Netherworld, or the ancient Book of the Dead, describes how the dead sun god changes himself at the 10th station into Khepri, the scarab, and then at the 12th station mounts the barge which carries the rejuvenated sun god into the morning sky. Jung's patient's psychic life had been dead, but was rejuvenated by a scarab beetle synchronicity, which convinced her of a meaningful connection between her inner psychic life and the natural world around her. All synchronicities ultimately point to the ultimate archetype of wholeness through the union of opposites, because all of them indicate a meaningful union of the overarching opposition between our mental life, psyche, and the physical world around us, cosmos. So every synchronicity has a particular meaning inherent to that particular coincidence, but regardless of the individual meaning of any particular synchronicity, they all point to the archetype of wholeness through the union of opposites. Physics of synchronicity, Einstein, Pauli, and Susskind. So here's a letter Jung wrote to Carl Selig in 1953. He says, Professor Einstein was my guest on several occasions at dinner. These were very early days when Einstein was developing his first theory of relativity. It was Einstein who first started me off thinking about a possible relativity of time as well as space and their psychic conditionality. More than 30 years later, the stimulus led to my relation with the physicist Professor W. Pauli and to my thesis of psychic synchronicity. So Jung learned about the relativity of space and time from Einstein himself, and then he learned about quantum mechanics from Wolfgang Pauli, who was right there at the origin of the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics. So he was tapped into the core of the evolution of 20th century physics, which helped him develop his own theory of psychic synchronicity. So I say, if general relativity and quantum mechanics both shed light on synchronicities, their union in string theory should be all the more revealing. A union of mind and matter in the holographic film at the cosmic horizon, where the past, present, and future are superimposed at each point, and the strings that project the holographic movie we experience as space-time provide the perfect mechanism to explain synchronicities. How is it possible for there to be meaningful coincidences between material events and our meaning-perceiving minds? Where's the connecting point where mind and matter meet? Well, I'm arguing, based on the psyche equals singularity equation, that mind and matter meet in the central singularity which exists at each point of the encompassing horizon, where the past, the present, and the future are interwoven at each point, as well as each human being's conscious experience. Our minds and the material world are merged in the singularity and at the horizon of the cosmos from which the three-dimensional holographic illusion is projected. So meaningful coincidences can be coordinated there, out at that collective unconscious mind, or the cosmic horizon. Alfred North Whitehead, Four Phases of the Universe. So Alfred North Whitehead is the one who said everything in Western philosophy is a footnote to Plato. And what he says here in his book, Process in Reality, I think will help explain how holographic string theory can help explain synchronicities. So according to Whitehead, there are thus four creative phases in which the universe accomplishes its actuality. There is first the phase of conceptual origination, deficient in actuality but infinite in its adjustment evaluation. So I equate that first phase of creation with the singularity before the Big Bang. It's infinite in containing all of the potential for the unfolding of the universe, but it has zero actuality. Secondly, there is the temporal phase of physical origination with its multiplicity of actualities. I equate that with the Big Bang and ongoing expansion of space-time. Whitehead says, thirdly, there is the phase of perfected actuality, in which the many are one everlastingly, without the qualification of any loss either of individual identity or of completeness of unity. In everlastingness, immediacy is reconciled with objective immortality. I equate that with holographic information conservation at the cosmic horizon, where Jung said he experienced the past, the present, and the future blissfully and simultaneously. Continuing with Whitehead, he says, in the fourth phase, the creative action completes itself, for the perfected actuality passes back into the temporal world and qualifies this world so that each temporal actuality includes it as an immediate fact of relevant experience. I equate that with cinematic hologram projected by strings from the cosmic horizon. In the fourth phase, that heavenly perfection at the cosmic horizon is projected back into the temporal world. That is how you can explain synchronicities. The past, the present, and the future are blissfully interwoven with each sentient soul at the horizon of the cosmos. So, meaning-perceiving minds and material events unfolding through space-time are connected out at the horizon, and that explains how the apparently unconnected minds perceiving the material objects unfolding according to the laws of physics, when those seem to be symbolically related, how could they be? Where was that connecting point? Again, out at the horizon of the cosmos. Synchronicity in the kingdom of heaven, Whitehead. So continuing in process and reality, Whitehead says, the ultimate evil in the temporal world is deeper than any specific evil. It lies in the fact that the past fades, that time is a perpetual perishing. That's clearly pertinent to this class, immortality and the unreality of death. The ultimate evil, the greatest fear, the mainspring of human activity is the fear of death. This class is intended to help us overcome that fear by realizing we are all eternal souls. We are all one with the omnicentric, eternal singularity. So continuing here, this is where Whitehead elaborates on these four phases of creation. He reiterates the fourth phase. He says, for the kingdom of heaven is with us today. The action of the fourth phase is the love of God for the world. It is the particular providence for particular occasions. What is done in the world, Big Bang from the primordial singularity, is transformed into a reality in heaven, information conservation at the cosmic horizon, and the reality in heaven passes back into the world, cinematic hologram projected by strings from the cosmic horizon. By reason of this reciprocal relation, the love in the world passes into the love in heaven and floods back again into the world. In this sense, God is the great companion, the fellow sufferer who understands. I say synchronicities are God's way of expressing personalized messages of loving understanding to his suffering parts and parcels. When the infinite God orchestrates the vast and complex forces of nature to deliver a poetic message made especially for you, you will feel the numinous energy and understand God's intention. So throughout this class I've been saying I do believe in God, but even if there is no God, still psychology indicates that humans cannot be happy unless we believe that an omnipotent God loves us infinitely and that our lives can be perceived as important to this omniscient, omnipotent God. We have to perform some kind of a heroic mission that is appreciated by God. That is the only way the human psyche, which consists of a combination of the symbolic self and the animal's bodily self, which will die, the horror of that imminent death, provokes all of our heroics and our attempts to become eternal. Well, those heroics are not futile if there is a God observing us and everything that we do. So at any rate, the point of this slide is that synchronicities can be orchestrated at the horizon of the cosmos, which St. Augustine called the heaven of heaven, which I'm equating with the collective unconscious mind. When you experience a synchronicity, that should help give you faith that there is a God. I'm saying even if there isn't a God, you should believe in God, but the existence of synchronicities is just one more area of evidence, of empirical evidence that there is a God. St. Augustine's synchronicity, tolle lege. So here's a historically important synchronicity that helped shape the entire Western world and therefore world history in general. In a garden in Milan in 386 AD, a young Augustine threw himself under a fig tree, weeping because of his inability to overcome the lusty habits of his youth, which kept him from surrendering his life fully to Christ. He heard a child from a nearby house repeating a kind of sing-song phrase that he had never heard before, to le lege, take and read. It reminds me of the game that children play today in pools, Marco Polo. One child closes his or her eyes and tries to tag the other children, and to locate where they are, the child calls out Marco, and then all the other children say Polo, and then by listening to where those voices are coming from, the child with the closed eyes reaches out and tries to find them. So in pools throughout the United States of America, I don't know if this same game is played in other countries, you'll often hear Marco Polo, Marco Polo. So it was something like that. Augustine heard some child saying, to le lege, take and read. So he's thrown himself under this fig tree in a garden. He's weeping. He's in this state of intense remorse. And then he hears this child saying, to le lege. Then, in his own words from his book, The Confessions, he says, damning the flood of my tears, I arose, interpreting the incidents as quite certainly a divine command to open my book of Scripture and read the passage at which I should open. This is what he read from the book of Romans in the New Testament. Not in rioting and drunkenness, not in chambering and impurities, not in contention and envy, but put ye on the Lord Jesus Christ, and make not provision for the flesh in its concupiscences. The moment he finished that sentence, Augustine says, a light of utter confidence shone in my heart, and all the darkness of uncertainty vanished away. So there's a synchronicity. He hears a child saying to le lege when he's at his worst point of despair, thinking he'll never be able to overcome his bodily desires and surrender himself to God. At that lowest point, he hears a child saying, to le lege, take and read, and he was certain that that was God telling him, pick up your book of Scriptures and read, and there you'll find the answer to your problems. He did. It seemed to be particularly addressed to his particular problem of overcoming his lust, and from that moment on, a light of utter confidence shone in his heart, and he became Saint Augustine, who was the architect of Western Christendom throughout the Middle Ages. Petrarch's synchronicity, Augustine's synchronicity revisited. So I'm getting this information from Richard Tarnus's book Cosmos and Psyche. In Cosmos and Psyche, Richard Tarnus describes the link between Augustine's synchronicity and Petrarch's climbing of Mount Ventoux in April 1336, an event that has long been regarded by scholars as representing the symbolic beginning of the Renaissance. According to Tarnus, upon reaching the peak of Mount Ventoux, after much inner turmoil and reflection along the way, Petrarch pulled a copy of Augustine's Confessions out of his pack and opened randomly to a passage in which Augustine describes practically the same panoramic view of fields and water that Petrarch was beholding, inspiring him to write later, I could not believe that it was by a mere accident that I happened upon them. What I had there read I believed to be addressed to me and to no other, remembering that St. Augustine had once suspected the same thing in his own case. I say the same synchronicity which inspired St. Augustine to inspire the birth of Western Christendom later inspired Petrarch to inspire the birth of the Renaissance. So Petrarch climbed a mountain, and then at the top, when he's looking at this panoramic view, he pulls out his copy of Augustine's Confessions, where he finds Augustine describing a similar panoramic view. That coincidence reminded Petrarch of the other synchronicity or meaningful coincidence that Augustine wrote about in his book, which we just discussed, when he threw himself under the fig tree in the Garden of Milan and he heard the child say, to le lege, and he took that as a command from God to pick up his book of Scriptures, and he read a passage from the book of Romans about abandoning licentiousness and putting on Jesus Christ. So it's just important in the history of the Western world. The Middle Ages began with a synchronicity that Augustine encountered. And then the next phase, the Renaissance, began when Petrarch experienced a synchronicity which made him think back to the synchronicity that Augustine wrote about in the Confessions. Synchronicity has been guiding the evolution of Western history, at least St. Augustine, and I'm saying it can help us move to the next phase of history where we realize psyche equals singularity. Empirical basis of synchronicity shock the prejudice of our age. Continuing with Jung's essay Synchronicity, let us return to the problem of the empirical basis of synchronicity. So empiricism claims that knowledge must come through our 5 bodily sense organs. We must be able to see, touch, taste, smell, or hear something. So continuing, the main difficulty here is to procure empirical material from which we can draw reasonably certain conclusions, and unfortunately this difficulty is not an easy one to solve. The experiences in question are not ready to hand. We must therefore look in the obscurest corners and summon up courage to shock the prejudice of our age if we want to broaden the basis of our understanding of nature. Is synchronicity an aspect of nature? Is the theory of meaningful coincidences emerging from the collective unconscious mind true? Where's the evidence? Where's the empirical evidence? Well, we do have empirical evidence. On an individual level, we know what we're thinking of in our mind, and then if something symbolically related happens outside of us in the material world, that's empirical evidence. But it seems to be limited to the individual. How could you prove that to other people? Is there any realm of synchronicities that are open for public discussion and to be observed empirically by a group of people? And that will lead us now to the theory of astrology. Astrology, highly controversial class of synchronicities. So this is Richard Tarnas's other book, Cosmos and Psyche, Intimations of a New Worldview. His first book is The Passion of the Western Mind, which is his history of the development of Western philosophy. It's such a great book that I was induced to buy Cosmos and Psyche even though I was skeptical about astrology. I was moving out of an apartment in 2007 and someone stole my book bag out of the car, which had my copy of Passion of the Western Mind in it. So I went to the bookstore to get another copy, and there was his new book on the display case, Cosmos and Psyche, and I thought, well, if anyone else had written this, I probably wouldn't buy it, but given that it's Richard Tarnas, let me see what it has to say. And after reading the book and then observing the world around me through this astrological lens, I began to notice that yes, there are such things as astrological synchronicities, and that does provide public empirical evidence for the existence of meaningful coincidences, in this case between the positions of the planets and life on Earth. And as I've been repeating, all synchronicities point to the ultimate archetype of wholeness through the union of opposites, because they show a meaningful relationship between mind and matter, which are the 2 main categories of opposites. All pairs of opposites can be categorized either as mental or as physical, so if mind and matter are merged, that's a merging of all pairs of opposites, which points to the archetype of wholeness through the union of opposites. What I'm saying here is that astrology provides us the empirical evidence required to confirm the existence of synchronicities which point to the archetype of the self, the archetype of wholeness through the union of opposites. So if you want to take this leap of faith in the idea of an infinite God who has a loving connection with people here on Earth, astrological synchronicities make that leap of faith seem much more reasonable. Horoscope mandala of the universal self. Even without knowing how astrology works, one can see that it combines most of the symbolic components required for the synthesis of Susskind's string theory and Jung's psychology. First, astrology deals with the cosmic horizon from the geocentric perspective, which places each of us in the center of a cosmic mandala representing the self, just as Susskind's theory places each of us in the center of an expanding universe, our own private inside-out black hole. So the astrological horoscope has Earth in the center, and all of the other planets are superimposed at the outermost perimeter of the circle, along with the signs of the zodiac, the constellations out at the horizon of the cosmos. So astrology puts us in the center of the universe, just like Carl Jung's theory of the archetype of the self, this omnicentric archetype, which is the center of the universe, but that also encompasses the outermost periphery. Hegel said the same thing about the absolute idea. So the astrological mandala, Carl Jung says the archetype of the self, guides egos conflicted by opposing demands in life toward it by producing psychic images of mandalas. Circles are spheres with a central point, that those are the signposts leading towards the archetype of the self. So the horoscope mandala does correspond to the mandala of the archetype of the self. Second, it superimposes all of the planets and constellations on the circumference of the horoscope mandala, which is similar to Jung's mandala model of the self, and the way that Susskind string theory superimposes all of the information describing all of the planets and all of the galaxies in the universe at the cosmic horizon. So on the horoscope, all of the planets are out at that outermost circle. They're not layered according to their distance from Earth, but they're all superimposed on the outermost sphere. Just like holographic string theory says, any bit of information in any three-dimensional volume of space is actually a holographic projection from a two-dimensional film at the surface area. So all of the planets in the solar system are superimposed at the heliosphere surrounding the solar system. Everything in our galaxy is superimposed at the galactic halo, and ultimately everything in the universe is superimposed at each point of the encompassing sphere of the universe, the cosmic horizon. Finally, astrology describes how the center of the cosmos, representing life on Earth, and their circumference are meaningfully related by synchronicities. Cosmos and Psyche, Intimations of a New Worldview, the basics of astrology. So I'm not giving a class on astrology in this class. I'm just saying that empirical evidence for the existence of the archetype of wholeness through the union of opposites can be found by observing astrological synchronicities. So in this slide, I'm just going to mention very briefly the basic elements of astrology, and then I provide a cite to Richard Tarnas's academic journal, the Archae Journal, which is found at archae.org. I have an article about Plato's Republic and astrology in this Archae Journal, but let me just mention these basic points. Geocentric horoscope mandala. We mentioned that in the previous slide. According to astrology, the horoscope is a mandala with Earth in the center, and that represents each of us and all of the planets out at the outermost circumference of the circle. Planetary alignments. Okay, so the different planets, each one represents a specific archetype. I think most of us are familiar with at least two of the planetary archetypes, Venus and Mars. Venus is the goddess of beauty and love and refinement. Mars is the warrior god, the energetic conqueror god. When these planets are in certain geometrical alignments on the horoscope mandala with Earth at the center, then certain types of events that are archetypally related to those planets occur more frequently. So, for example, Earth is at the center. In relation to Earth, if Mars and Venus are conjunct on top of each other at any point in the circumference of the outer perimeter of the horoscope, then on Earth people would experience more of an energetic embrace of physical beauty. That kind of an archetypal atmosphere would be more predominant on the Earth at that time. Other planets have different archetypes, and the psychological tenor and even physical events that correlate symbolically to those archetypes occur more often. As these planets come into particular alignments, then the synchronistic similarities of life on Earth become more intense, like a wave pattern, like a wave of probability. They start out slowly, they reach their peak when the geometrical alignment is exact, and then they fade out gradually. The natal chart, that represents where the planets were in the sky in relation to Earth at the moment you were born. And it's a kind of a DNA of the archetypal attitude towards life that you will take. And it also represents your physical nature, the way you embrace other people in your society, what kind of a career you might take. That is all implied in the natal chart. World transits are the relationships of the planets to Earth and how it affects the whole world. Personal transits takes into account where the positions of the planets are at any given moment in relation to where those planets were when you were born. So the Earth in general experiences certain archetypal alignments in common. Everybody's experiencing the same world transits, and those have historical ramifications according to Cosmos and Psyche, which we can trust because the man who wrote that book also wrote The Passion of the Western Mind. And he admits when he was writing The Passion of the Western Mind, he had astrology in mind to help him give this archetypal backbone to what he was saying. So personal transits take into account the world transits, and then they are personalized for the positions of the planets when you were born. So for example, if there was a Mars-Venus conjunction, then everyone's feeling a little more romantic, a little more randy on the Earth. But let's say that that Mars-Venus conjunction occurred right on top of your natal Saturn. Saturn, the Greeks called Saturn Kronos, the Romans called Kronos Saturn. Saturn represents time and constriction and has a negative connotation of a taskmaster. So maybe the Mars-Venus conjunction on your Saturn could be represented as something like a crushing of love in your life, the death of romance in your life. So the world transits will affect individuals differently depending on where the planets were when they were born. And it's important to note here also that Richard Tarnas says the astrological alignments don't cause things to happen on the Earth. Just like if you look at the clock and it says 2 o'clock, the clock is not causing it to be 2 o'clock. The clock is just measuring a synchronicity between that mechanism of the clock and the positions of the planets, which determine what time it is. Specifically, the relationship of the spinning of the Earth as it revolves around the Sun. So it's an acausal relationship. The alignments of the planets and the way they correlate with life on Earth and the emotional things that happen, the physical unfoldings that occur, neither one causes the other. Both are occurring in an acausal relationship that nevertheless points to some synchronizing medium in the universe, which I'm saying is the horizon of the cosmos. So synchronic patterns, those are the patterns that occur when these planetary alignments are in effect. I'm using the Mars-Venus conjunction as an example here. We will be speaking about the Neptune-Uranus conjunction in a moment, but everyone knows about Venus and Mars, so that's a synchronic pattern. They're conjunct. Now, a diachronic pattern is that the events that occur during one alignment, they fade out as those planets leave their geometric exact alignment, and then as they enter the next phase of this diachronic pattern, then whatever historical narrative occurred in the previous alignment picks up again and goes to the next phase, to the next chapter. So there's two types of these diachronic patterns. There's hard alignments, which are 90-degree increments around the central Earth, and then there's soft alignments, which are 60-degree and 120-degree relationships. Trines and sextiles are soft, and the right angles and 180-degree opposition angles and conjunctions are called the hard alignments. Those details can be found at this archi.org website, which is established by Richard Tarnas. It includes insights from other astrologers as well, but if you want to get more information on the fundamentals of astrology, I recommend that website. Uranus-Neptune. The most recent Uranus-Neptune conjunction peaked in 1992 and 1993, the latter of which was the same year Susskind and 't Hooft developed their holographic interpretation of string theory. Uranus, according to Tarnas and many other astrologers, represents the Promethean archetype, the rebellious Titan who stole fire from the Olympian gods to give to humans, and is therefore associated, among other things, and this is a quote from Tarnas, with the heavens, the cosmic, the astronomical, and astrological. According to Tarnas, Neptune is associated with the transcendent, spiritual, ideal, symbolic, and imaginative dimensions of life, with the subtle, formless, intangible, and invisible, with the unitive, timeless, immaterial, and infinite, with all that which transcends the limited, literal, temporal, and material world of concretely empirical reality. In another passage, Tarnas explains how the emergence of string theory in the early 1990s is archetypally correlated with the conjunction relative to Earth of Uranus and Neptune. String theory and the bubbling multiverse. Uranus-Neptune. So reading again here from Richard Tarnas's book, Cosmos and Psyche. Many characteristic Uranus-Neptune themes were evident in the sciences during these same years. The rise of theories of hyperspace, alternative realities, virtual particles, invisible dark matter and dark energy, and multidimensional string theory, with the universe composed of strings so small that a direct observation would be tantamount to reading the text on this page from a distance of 100 light-years, all suggest this archetypal gestalt. Similarly reflective of the Uranus-Neptune complex is the increasingly popular multiverse theory, with our universe seen as but one of countless other universes existing in other dimensions, with new self-reproducing inflationary universes being endlessly produced out of black holes and big bangs like bubbles out of an infinite sea of bubbles. Here we see the spontaneous rise in the scientific mind of Neptunian metaphors and qualities, sea, bubbles, infinity, invisible dimensions of reality, unfettered speculative imagination, combined with Uranian themes, astronomical science, surprisingly new realities, ceaseless cosmic creativity, and new beginnings. So in his book, Cosmos and Psyche, Richard Tarnas traced out the history of scientific discoveries in the Western world, and he showed how they correlate with certain planetary alignments. And he's going through the alignment of Uranus and Neptune, and he's showing how string theory and the multiverse theory symbolically represent this Uranus-Neptune archetypal conjunction. So I'm presenting it here because I'm saying holographic string theory provides a cosmology within which synchronicities in general and astrological synchronicities in particular make sense. All of the planets are superimposed with the Earth at the cosmic horizon, where they are interwoven at each point, and where, according to near-death experiences, people can experience the archetypes of the collective unconscious in a blissful way. And each bit of information that we've experienced in our lives and will experience is being radiated from that cosmic film on these fundamental strings like a cinematic hologram. It's just a double whammy of evidence. Holographic string theory provides the cosmology within which astrology makes sense, and the emergence of string theory during the Uranus-Neptune conjunction provides more evidence for the fact of astrological synchronicities. Uranus-Neptune. Susskind presents his holographic string theory, including the megaverse of universes, as evidence against the need for an intelligent psyche to fine-tune the physical constants of nature required for life to exist in the universe. Nevertheless, his theory mirrors and thereby supports the Vedic Platonic Jungian cosmology. Moreover, the historical fact that his holographic string theory of a sea of bubble universes coincidentally emerged when Uranus and Neptune were conjunct relative to Earth can be presented as an example of astrological synchronicity, which inherently points to the meaningful union of mind and matter in the mandala manifesting archetype of the self. Suskind's theory furthermore provides a plausible cosmological mechanism to explain synchronicities. Every event in space-time is occurring simultaneously at each point of the holographic film at the cosmic horizon, from where the cinematic hologram of our three-dimensional life on Earth is cast by fundamental strings of energy. So I just reiterated what I said on the previous slide, but it's worthy of being reiterated because we're looking for publicly accessible empirical evidence for synchronicities. All synchronicities point to the ultimate archetype of wholeness through the union of opposites, which I am equating with the psyche equals singularity equation. The whole purpose of this class is to help us take a leap of faith in the truth of the psyche equals singularity equation, and I'm saying, looking at astrological alignments within the context of holographic string theory, especially when we synthesize it with Jungian psychology, makes that leap of faith in the psyche equals singularity equation that much easier. Continuing with the theme of synchronicities in string theory, Leonard Susskind himself says, quote, "The discovery of string theory, which in a sense is still ongoing, was full of twists of fate, reversals of fortune, and serendipity." So that's in the Cosmic Landscape, page 204. Serendipity is fortunate discoveries made by accident. In an earlier slide, I discussed this serendipitous discovery of the Euler beta function and how that was seen to correlate with the strong nuclear force. So I'm going to read that again. This is from my book, Psyche and Singularity. This is on page 238. So I'll just read a little bit more to show how synchronicities and string theory work together. Not only does string theory provide the cosmology within which string theory makes sense, but a string of synchronicities or meaningful coincidences led to the discovery of holographic string theory. So let me read what I read before on a previous slide. As Brian Greene explains in The Elegant Universe, the series of what can be recognized as synchronicities most directly related to Susskind's string theory began to emerge in 1968, when the Italian physicist Gabriele Veneziano, then working at CERN, fortuitously discovered that, quote, "An esoteric formula concocted for purely mathematical pursuits by the renowned Swiss mathematician Leonhard Euler some 200 years earlier, the so-called Euler beta function, seemed to describe numerous properties of strongly interacting particles in one fell swoop." So then I say that Euler in the late 18th century had no intention of mathematically mirroring the strong nuclear force, which was not discovered until 1932, powerfully supports Jung and Pauli's theory that the mirror symmetries between the mathematical world of numbers and the physical world of things inevitably emerge from the underlying archetypes. Citing similar examples of mathematical formulas preceding the discovery of the physical processes they mirror, Danzig, the historian of mathematics whom Einstein admired, he worked at the University of Maryland, it was back in the 1920s and 30s, I believe, he writes that, quote, "The mathematician may be compared to a designer of garments who is utterly oblivious of the creatures whom his garments may fit." So that's an interesting point. Mathematicians discover these interesting mathematical formulas, and then later physicists discover that those mathematical formulas describe a particular part of nature. For example, the Euler beta function, some mathematical formula that was discovered 200 years before string theory was discovered, was found to describe the strong interactions within the nucleus of an atom. Now, continuing with this synchronicities, Leonard Susskind's involved with one himself, so I'm continuing to read here from Psyche and Singularity. Green goes on to explain that 2 years after Veneziano accidentally discovered the correlation between Euler's formula and the strong force, Yoichiro Nambu, Holger Nielsen, and Leonard Susskind, each independently, now this is a quote from Green, showed that if one modeled elementary particles as little vibrating one-dimensional strings, their nuclear interactions could be described exactly by Euler's function. Those strings, which were discovered in 1969, that's the original version of string theory, which was then reinvented by Susskind and others on a much smaller scale where the strings are down at the Planck scale, too small to be empirically observed. Those are the strings of holographic string theory. But it took these steps of development, beginning with this fortuitous discovery of the parallel between Euler's beta function and the strong nuclear force. Then if they said, oh, let's look at these particles and see them not as particles but tiny elastic strings, then this correlation between the Euler beta function and the strong nuclear force was even stronger. But the point is, synchronicities. Even Leonard Susskind acknowledges that serendipities and reversals of fortune and twists of fate were involved in his string theory, so I'm going to go back and read more from Psyche and Singularity. I say it seems that the serendipitous correlation between Susskind's atheistically presented string theory and Jung's transpersonally oriented psychology is the ultimate reversal of fortune in the history of string theory, the inevitable enantiodromia before the final union of opposites. I hope you are enjoying this hero's journey into the realm of philosophy, psychology, and physics. If you want to help me create more content like this, please subscribe and consider sponsoring me here on YouTube. You can also click the link to my website, psycheandsingularity.com, to sign up for a multiple choice test with over 100 well-crafted questions related to this class, and links to the specific parts of each video where the answers can be found. If you take that test to the end, you will receive a certificate indicating that you have become a Psyche and Singularity scholar. In addition to access to that test, there is also the opportunity to answer essay questions that ask you to relate concepts covered in this class to your own hero's journey. I will personally respond to each of those essays, point out any other parts of this class that I think might bolster your plan. Finally, I want to point out that this course is sponsored by the Platonic Mystery School of the Divine Infinite Being, and you can check those guys out at divineinfinitebeing.com.